Good evening. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral here in San Francisco, California. Welcome to the spring forum season. Gary Dorrien, the Reinhold Niebuhr Professor of Social Ethics at Union Theological Seminary and Professor of Religion at Columbia University, is the author of 24 books and more than 300 articles that range across the fields of social ethics, philosophy, theology, political economics, social and political theory, religious history, cultural criticism, and intellectual history. Social critic Michael Eric Dyson called him, quote, the greatest theological ethicist of the 21st century, our most compelling political theologian, and one of the most gifted historians of ideas in the world. Gary himself has said, I'm a jock who became a social solidarity activist, became an Episcopal cleric at 30, became an academic at 35, and never quite settled on a field. So now I explore the intersection of too many fields, end quote. Tonight, we're going to be talking about his newest book, Over from Union Road, My Christian Left Intellectual Life, a rich memoir of his unusual journey. Gary, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, thank you, Malcolm. It's just a delight for me to be with you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this so much. You know, I went to the American Academy of Religion, you get a stack of books, and I just stopped reading everything I had just to read your memoir. It was such a page turner. It's one of my favorite books that I read in the last 5 years or so. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. One of the things you talk a lot about in your early life is just like how much you loved sports. And I wonder how that shaped you and what it is that you love so much about baseball and what you loved about running as you grew older.
Well, I wouldn't have gotten through high school if it hadn't been for sports. I couldn't listen to teachers. I never could. Just, by my own thoughts, and they didn't like me. So the only reason I even got through high school is this sort of bumpkin from, semi-rural area. And even after we moved to better schools, I still can't listen to teachers. But of course, you have to stay eligible to play sports. So you have to do at least well enough to be eligible to play. And that it always. My father was an athlete. I started the book with an account about being 9 years old and pitching baseballs to a sleeping bag over the clothesline, and spending an awful lot of time by myself. That this ritual would always begin with an attempt to round up a baseball game out on Flatrell Road, but I only succeeded about once a week. And the rest of the time, I'm back in the backyard, just by myself, imagining strikeouts and occasionally throwing a football to imaginary receivers. And so that was just as about as formative as anything could be. And partly it's just even a relationship with my father. What it's going to mean to have a relationship with my father. So he was interested in all these sports, and then once golf became his great obsession in life, then I followed him out there, and I caddied for him for years before I could play in his group. The rest, all my brothers today, they're all golfers, but back then I was the only one who did what was necessary to have a relationship with him where you would actually spend a lot of time with him, and maybe he's going to talk to you, to be out there where he was, which is out on the golf course. So that was an aspect of it as well. It was kind of entering his life world and seeing the world the way he did, and having a relationship to him, and always imagining or sometimes hearing from the stands his reaction to something I've done out there. It's a way of kind of being seen by him. So I have this fantasy from early on, from the first time he took me. Instead of taking my mother, he took me one time to watch the Midland Chemics play football. And oh my goodness, for the rest of my adolescence, I have to be a quarterback for the Chemics. That's just the telos of my whole adolescence, is to get that to that phase of life. So sports filled me up and gave me discipline and things to imagine and fantasize about. And it was also a place where you have to learn how to deal with disappointment, crushing loss. You have to learn how to be able to work with other folks and so on, to be a good teammate. So all those things, I have nothing but good feelings about what sports meant to me. And so years later, when I'm past all that, I had just had to take up running. To me, running had never been an end in itself.
Right, exactly. We just ran to get in shape for the sports.
But now it does become, oh my goodness, running could be just something in itself. And that's up and down the Charles River, all around Fresh Pond, places because it was during that period of life when I thought, okay, I need to adjust where just running is enough.
Yeah, I loved running in Cambridge so much. It was just a great way of exploring the place. And, sports as a youth for me is about being corrected, it's about not taking things personally. It's about being coached, and I think that is, something that not everybody gets, just like an ability to detach yourself from, what your performance is on the playing field.
Oh, yeah. I've been married a few years. I married this, fabulous Presbyterian pastor. Who is, of course, as you know, the middle parts of the book are really about her. Yeah. But we've been married a little while, and she said, I've come to realize that the only person that's ever really influenced you is Coach. And she says, it's not even any particular coach, is it? It's just all those coaches. They're kind of amalgamation in your head. And I said, you have understood me. That's exactly right.
I love that. So in the early part of the book, you write kind of about your teenage self, and you said that, I love this line, you said that you yearned for a worldview. I love that because I did definitely feel like that. I was looking to like adults and they weren't giving me much of a chance to, and so I was looking to books. Tell us a little bit about how you did develop that worldview over time and just kind of how it's changed through your whole life.
I've always been a voracious reader. What was going on at school was never very interesting. Occasionally something would happen. So there were those moments when something happened in school that that fortunately caught my attention. But most of the time I'm just thinking about things I've read because the idea of taking a school book home and reading, that never occurred to me until like second semester, senior year. Just, no, I'm not going to ruin my evenings reading, what's going on. It's bad enough that I have to suffer all day long in school, so I'm not going to prolong it in the evening. That's time now to read my own books. But I've always been someone who went to the public library and, walked out with 7 or 8 books and just read them voraciously. So that's as far back as I've got in memory, as those trips to the public library, where that can occur, and exhausting this very meager school library that we had in this rural area. So that's certainly it. And some of these books, of course, go with my sports obsession. So of course, that's one run of things. Are books that go with that. In the 9th grade, I had been caught by the civil rights movement, so that becomes another really important, in some ways, kind of bedrock obsession for me, was reading. When I began to read just everything that the local public library had about the civil rights movement, including the biography of King Crusader Without Violence, which I read 3 times in the 9th grade, and then so that took me to Dr. King's own book, Stride Toward Freedom, and that you could hardly overstate the sort of significance of that book in my life, in my trajectory, who I became, and all of it. That's something so specific, I almost don't even want to get myself going on it. But more generally, yes, this kind of this sense that there's some world beyond this very rural, trailer parkish, dirt road world of my upbringing that is more interesting than what is occurring in my lived world. And so wanting to know more about what it's like out there, including even what first hit me about the civil rights movement. Because indeed, civil rights movement, to just even read stories about it, now reading books about what's going on, we have these marching children in Montgomery, and what is going on there? And of course, it is something of a refutation of that America, the greatest story that you get in school. And so, what is up with that? How can this be the same country that they talk about in school when that is going on, and my own time, including also then religion. Because religion is just something in the civil rights movement. And Dr. King himself just speaks in a way that got nothing to do with this occasionally get to mass, church that is my religious experience. But all of that does have to do with kind of putting together some kind of worldview, and so, yeah, there are a few kind of clues about that in that first chapter of the book. One was just the sheer impact of the cross, the crucifix on me. That is something that hits me early on, and later on, of course, these two cross stories are just going to fold together for me. Jesus on the cross, and then losing Martin Luther King, since of course we lost him when I was in high school. But reading has always been, to me, it's as natural as breathing, and it's always been my salvation.
Yeah, I feel so fortunate. I mean, you're right. It's a way of being connected and hearing the best ideas of people at their very best, having a chance to really think about things and coalesce what that thought is. When you went to college, you kind of discovered Immanuel Kant and Hegel. Can you talk a little bit about just that? Like, why is it important for people to know something about Kant, these days?
Well, firstly, I did have this yearning. I mean, I had this sense about what might be possible once I get to college. And it's not even which courses I might take, which is the wrong way to think. But it was the college library. It just was like a kid in a sandbox. And I had, by virtue of having read that Pilgrimage to Nonviolence chapter in the 9th grade, I mean, that chapter of King's book, Stride Toward Freedom, is just chock full of theologians and philosophers who were not available at the local college, local public library. I mean, I did look for them, and no, none of them. So I have this sense, I'm going to need to wait to read these people that King is talking about. And meanwhile, just even how close can I come to that? So junior, senior year of high school, yes, I read William James and John Booth and Emerson especially. Emerson is a trigger because indeed there had been that 1 week of sophomore English where we read Emerson. He gets 125 pages in the Norton Anthology after all. So there's a good dose of Emerson in there. And wow, this is interesting. This goes to the worldview issue. It's spiritual. It's not churchy, and yet it's spiritual. I love this kind of language of the oversoul. There's some person's spirituality actually radiating through these wonderfully written pages that just light up. And so, yeah, Emerson was a trigger for me. Someone who I read all the Emerson books at the public library. And then the nearby shelf space meant that I was going to William James and John Dewey after that. So that was, I'd had that whole kind of run while I was in high school. But meanwhile, I do have this sense from having read King. I've got these words in my head, personalists and Kantians and, my goodness, whatever a post-Kantian is and so on. That is a kind of, I've had to wait for this. And so when I got to Alma College Library, I walked in there and just saw it just saw it in all its magnificence. Just rows and rows and rows of books by and about all these people that I've been waiting to read. Yeah, I did line them up and just read voraciously in college. But fortunately, I also had wonderful teachers. And just 2 weeks ago, I gave a commencement address at my
that's great.
college.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful.
Invited me back 51 years later. So I did a little memory lane run about just my teachers there and just what it meant to me, and just even how certain ones whom I have channeled ever since, teaching, thinking about how they did it. So Alma College was a godsend for me. It's one of the great blessings of my life. But first and foremost for me was just the sheer there-ness of the library, of
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
what it is that it's making available to me, and I just couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah, well, our son basically went and visited a college, and he was excited about the college. Went there and saw the library, and that was it. Like, wasn't even going to apply because the library wasn't up to snuff. So this is kind of a silly question, and you don't have to answer if you don't want. We can move right on. But if you could spend the afternoon with any theologian who died before the year 1975, who would that be, and what questions might you ask that person?
Well, I think it would have to be William Temple, although it's not someone, just because of the role that he played in my life.
Yeah.
And of course, that's a little bit of a delay, because even though I am this voracious reader, it's not like he didn't come up. I mean, this is a liberal Protestant college, Presbyterian background there. So I think that the Anglican pickings were very, very meager anyway. So there wasn't. I might have read everything that they had and wouldn't have read much having to do with Anglican theology, and in fact did not. And in fact, the people I'm reading, the canon that I'm reading in those years, that's Tillich and Barth and Niebuhr, and then importantly to me, Rauschenbusch. Walter Rauschenbusch is tremendously important to me, and I had. At my sort of doing, Alma College brought James Cone to my little college while I was there. So I actually met the great James Cone when I was there. Of course, many years later, he became a dear friend to me. But it's that, that kind of wing of kind of progressive Protestantism. So all of these people are tremendously important to me, and I do end up seeing the world through the thinking and lives and times of these canonical, major theologians of the 19th and 20th centuries. And yet the whole Anglican story is something to the side of what that was. I wasn't really even much aware of anyone coming out of England during that period. It's only when I got to seminary and then, kind of thinking about, okay, what gaps do I have in my own kind of formation? What did I not read by virtue of having pretty much just been so attached to this one college library?
Actually one of the questions I had for you too is, what is Anglican theology and who are the important figures in that tradition? So we're going to be interviewing an Episcopal theologian in like 3 weeks. So it's been very much on my mind, but what is Anglican theology? What is distinctive characteristics? Who are important figures in that tradition?
Yeah, if you had asked, if you had said, okay, who was it in college? I would have had to say, Rauschenbusch. Yeah. And then either Barth or Tillich, because they're the two, 20th century theology, so much of it is just a Barth versus Tillich discussion, about methodologically and all of it. And they're just such towering figures that just even reading enough of both of them to feel like you've got a kind of competent grasp of what they said. That's just sort of exhaustive. So, and then for Rauschenbusch, I would have said, the reason that Rauschenbusch lit me up is there is something here. He is the answer to something that is a question I had even in my high school years about what's so different with Martin Luther King? How is it that religion means something to him and is being expressed in a way that I just don't see the church mostly ever being? How is it that faith can even be lived out in some way that isn't like what I'm used to? Because it seems to me the faith should sound like this. It should be more like Martin Luther King. So how come it isn't? And I went to college with that question. And reading Walter Rauschenbusch, Christianity and the Social Crisis, it's like, this guy had the same question. And now he's got whole chapters that are just dealing with that very thing. And that book kind of lit me up. I was not sure at all that I was going to study theology much beyond just satisfying my own curiosity about it until I read Rauschenbusch. And now someone who had my very question is now just writing this sensational book that has, made me something of a disciple of Rauschenbusch.
I remember reading it in the fall of 1991 and just having the same experience. It's just like, it was so amazing to read about it, and have that sense too of just, what's continuous with those times and what is discontinuous too.
Malcolm, a few years later, I studied when I was a student at Union Theological Seminary, and I'm a shy kid in the back row, and I've lost my brother, so I'm just trying to be there and be alone, and not be known by anybody. But Gustavo Gutierrez was teaching that year, and I'm in the back. And one week he walked in and said, I've just spent the past week reading this guy, Walter Rauschenbusch. How come you Americans don't talk about this guy? He is fabulous. How come you never talk about it? And that gave me the courage to come up at the end of the class and approach this, great famous person who to me was 10 feet tall, and tell him what Rauschenbusch meant to me, that Rauschenbusch changed my life in college. And so then, we formed a bond.
Yeah, what a great connection that is. Yeah, we have, like I mentioned earlier, we have a Walter Rauschenbusch stained glass window. He's like one of the biggest figures in our newer windows. And I love that. Every time I see him, I can see where I was when I was reading that book. And all those books are like in that bookshelf. They're in the frame of this picture. Stride Toward Freedom, Walter Rauschenbusch, all of his books. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the Episcopal Church. Like, how did you first encounter the Episcopal Church, and how did you decide to get ordained in the Episcopal Church too?
Well, firstly, I have a Catholic soul. I mean, I did. We were nominally Catholic, but it made an impression on me. So even weeks when my family didn't go to Mass, I usually would tag along with the next door neighbors, crawl in the back of their station wagon, and go with them. And so it's not very well lettered. I don't know much doctrine or anything. And yet the Mass itself, the spirituality of the Mass, the aura of sacred mystery that's in Catholic sanctuaries, and above all, Jesus crucified, just makes an impression on me that just from as far back as I can remember, I'm just sort of struck by the just sheer strangeness of it. And horror, but it's also compelling in some way. And it takes me years to sort of kind of verbalize it. You got to put it that way, but just to recognize that there's something sublime, but just also horrible and just incredibly strange that has to be explained about what is the nature of this religion that would say this is who we worship. This is the God figure of this religion. All of that sort of came together in a way that made such an early mark on me that certainly long before I would have had language for this, I've got a spirituality that's Catholic. And so that is in me, long before I got through high school or went to college or reading theology or any of that. It is the case that I wrote a senior year thesis at Elm, even though I only took one course in theology the whole time I was in college. I did write a senior thesis on Karl Rahner.
Yeah, right, exactly. Rahner in the window too.
Well, I thought, I've got all these liberal Protestants in my head. I spent all these years reading these people, and I know there's so much more theology than that. There's this whole Catholic side, for example, which I grew up in, that I know nothing about yet. So I'm a little bit belated. And I realized two things about this. One, no Catholic school would let me go straight to Rahner. I do get this. But nonetheless, hey, there's an advantage to just going to a Presbyterian school where no one here has read Rahner either. But fortunately, my teacher is willing. Yeah, he'd like to learn something about Rahner, especially if I'm willing to tie it to the Heideggerian stuff that's in Rahner, right? Yeah. And so indeed, I wrote a thesis about that kind of Heideggerian wellspring that's in Karl Rahner, because my thought was, if I've only got time for one modern Roman Catholic theologian, better read the best one. So lined up those books and spent weeks with Spirit in the World, and wrote a thesis on him. So I at least was armed with that much. when I got into Harvard Divinity School. I'm a Catholic who's read one Catholic theologian, but I'd gotten pretty far into them, so I felt like I had a little bit leveraged it out. But meanwhile, I got going on this a while ago. Meanwhile, yes, I still haven't really read any Anglicans. It's not part of my education. And it's not something that happened at Harvard either. It's not like any of these Anglicans who ended up in that book I published last year. None of them were in any course I ever took at Harvard or Union or Princeton. But there was my first kind of taste of it, was recognizing, yes, there's this sort of wonderful Christian tradition that is in some way spiritually more like what I grew up with, that is not quite this liberal Protestant world that I know so well. And so, I had to have this kind of sense that there might be a kind of landing place. Therefore, it just might be a place that someone like me could end up moving with, a mic on intellectualism, a mic on spirituality, and so I have a kind of sense that might be the case long before I really even tried it out. As you know from the memoir, I've got tragedies to go through and things that happen. So I'm negotiating a fair amount of that. But indeed, when I did finally read Nature, Man, and God in seminary, which I was at Union by the time I read it, it's in 1977, it was everything I hoped it might be and more, because now, oh my goodness, even though this guy couldn't be more different from me in some ways. I mean, he grew up in castles. He's like to the manor born. His father was the Archbishop of Canterbury, for goodness sake. And just privilege out to here. You can't get more different than me than that in some respects, and yet I don't feel the least bit alienated from him in any of that, because he's spiritually deep and compelling and writes beautifully, and he's a Hegelian, as I am, and Logos theology, and just all the things that I am. And not only that, but he's the very first person, really, who ever put Hegel and Whitehead together. Whitehead's barely come out with Process and Reality, and here's Temple on his feet giving the Gifford lectures, rethinking his own Logos theology, Hegelian version of Anglican theology, now in a conversation with Whitehead, because he has come to the view that actually this would be another way of explicating a kind of Logos theology worldview that isn't just an argument about how the mind into its objects of sense data, which is sort of the Hegelian starting point coming out of a Kantian frame. And so he's literally on his feet, kind of playing with it, pulling at both ends. And I just thought, oh my God, this is just magnificent. And I never sort of got over the sheer thrill of what it was reading that book, and thinking to myself, well, if this guy's an Anglican, let alone the gold standard of Anglican theology, I could be an Anglican. I could definitely go there. And so when I finally did join the Episcopal Church, now, there's, as you know from I told this story, I actually tried to join the Episcopal Church across the street from Princeton Seminary, because that's where I was by that time, at Princeton Seminary, doing 2 degrees there. Okay, I'm ready to sign up, but they wouldn't take me. And I'm a poor kid with no car, so it's not like I've got any option. And they wouldn't take me because, indeed, they had a policy. They just don't want to take people who are, on the road to ordination. That involves a whole set of duties that they just don't want to deal with Princeton Seminary students. So now I have to wait until I've moved past Princeton to join an Episcopal church, and then that turned out to be Albany, New York.
Yeah, St. Luke's. There's so many different walls that you had set up between you and getting to be an Episcopalian. It was just, as you're reading the book, I just felt it was remarkable that you made it.
Well, Malcolm, I had a saintly bishop, as you know. I loved your story about Tom Shaw in a recent sermon, and remembering people's names and knowing that that's one of his gifts. That was a gift that Bishop Hogg had. But he would say, he would go, enormous diocese. So he's getting to these little churches that every 2 or 3 years, he finally gets there. And now meeting these little children that he hasn't seen, in a couple of years, and say, "Oh, hello, Nancy. How are you? Hello, Tom. How are you?" And parents are just blown away by this. How in God's name can you do this? And his response was, "Well, I decided long ago that if children are important to God, they need to be important to me."
That's amazing. I love that.
That's a story. That's a little bit of an indication of how it is that I made it in Albany, because I should not have made it through the Diocese of Albany, New York, given just its profile and how it usually handled ordinands and people like me. And yet he was just a very special person in my life and a saintly figure. And so being there was just one of the great blessings in my life.
Yeah, I love it. My family almost moved to Albany at one point. I was thinking, there's so many times you and I just almost cross paths.
Yeah.
I wonder, thinking about ordained ministry too, just like, what did you learn about ordained ministry, both from your wife, Brenda, and from your daughter, Sarah?
Well, firstly, as you know from the memoir, I've never really even been a member of a church. I mean, not really, until I joined St. Andrew's in Albany, and then they put me on the staff. So I'm going right straight to being an associate pastor, and I've never really been a church member. I really don't understand what it is. I've got a totally kind of intellectual's way, an activist's way of kind of relating to what Christianity is in the world. Certainly it helped me enormously during those years. That's the same period, of course, when I married, since I met Brenda at Princeton Seminary. She was at Princeton, a Presbyterian ordination candidate, and so we got married coming out of seminary and moved to Albany. But Brenda has grown up in mainline Protestantism. She grew up Lutheran and then joined the Presbyterians. Had a conversion experience that brought her into Presbyterianism, but nonetheless, by virtue of her entire life background, she is, born and bred mainline Protestant. It's just mother's milk to her, and is so comfortable in that life world that can negotiate it in ways that she doesn't have to ask. Once she finally became a minister, what's a minister, right? Or what do ministers do, or the like. She's totally prepared. She won the ministry award at seminary the year we graduated. And so, I just talked to her about stuff and paid attention to her. And she tried to help because she is a kind of natural extrovert. You put me in a public square like right now, I can flip a switch, but I am painfully shy and introverted, and living with this person who's actually a natural extrovert, a person who could walk into a hospital room, who didn't have to walk back and forth 4 or 5 times to screw up the nerve to walk in because you're too shy to walk in, which is what I always go through. She has no idea what that feels like. And then, being kind of this introverted, shy person who makes people uncomfortable once you're there, because indeed I am uncomfortable and I'm awkward to be with. And then it goes a little better than I'm usually fearing. And so then there's still one more mistake you can make, and I usually make it, which is to stay too long because it's going better, than I thought. So now I have to excuse myself for leaving, and I say, "Well, I'll see you tomorrow." And Brenda would say, "Oh my goodness, Gary, what is wrong with you?" Well, she knows what's wrong with me. She lives with me. So, but I did get better at it just by virtue of watching her and following her around, and even doing the parts of her job that she didn't like. Because in fact, she hated doing weddings, and she hated doing adult ed. The part of her job that, of course, that's like water off a duck's back to me. So I could do that. So I taught her adult ed classes in her church during those years, and we were back and forth. Meanwhile, while I'm on an ordination track in the Episcopal Church. She had one rule about that. She said, I do think if you are overdue to join a church, just so you don't join my church. And indeed, that wasn't going to happen anyway. So,
So you, for many years, you did interfaith chapel services. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what that was like and what makes an interfaith chapel service work, like, and what's it like conducting worship in a setting like that?
Well, firstly, I had a kind of gentle introduction to that to start because, I was a prep school teacher and chaplain for 5 years. So for 5 years that I was in Albany, New York, I was the chaplain at a prep school that called itself ecumenical, but really it was an old failing Roman Catholic school and an old failing Episcopal school that, joined forces and said, maybe if we hang together, we can make a go of it. And indeed we did. It was a wonderful school. But it's we aspired to be more broadly ecumenical than that. But operationally, we really were, our ecumenism was sort of bound by those two things. And indeed, quite literally so, since we were literally housed at the Sisters of Sacred Heart convent, there. So the atmosphere of all that just sort of pervaded the place. And that's a school that since has gone secular. So they've cut the cord with all that it was. But back then, that's my introduction to even sort of doing ecumenism in a way that is that. But then meanwhile, of course, I'm also deeply involved in ecumenical work in Albany, New York. And ecumenical work in Albany was more old school, more kind of National Council of Churches, Crop Walk, Martin Luther King Day, that kind of thing. Older style not community organizing, not PICO or, DART or Faith at Work or the like. Not that model. So that's my early baptism in it, and I was very involved in, what was always the Martin Luther King service that year and the like. So in many ways, my activism bonded me to everything that the ecumenical movement was in Albany during those years, and that was how I sort of came up. It's only then years after that when I finally became an academic, which is at 35, surrounded by all these people saying to me, this is ridiculous. You need to just give it up. And look at you. You're even writing books in your spare time. Just go do it. That I finally did become an academic. Even there, I came in through the door of chaplaincy. So I was teaching full time, but also dean of the chapel. And there, my rule of thumb there was just to at least be as religiously diverse as the college was, so that I kind of inductive way, I'm always sort of looking for how much religious diversity do we actually even have here already, in a way that much of which is probably not seen. We wouldn't even recognize it as such unless we're kind of inductively going for it, including people who are spiritual but are not religious, or not spiritual at all but willing to do something involved, in this chapel program that I'm building, which is some of my best friends on the faculty, after all, since this is a college and the academics are mostly very secular. So yeah, it was all those things, and it was from a kind of inductive. It wasn't so much just bring it from the outside and kind of impose it on people. I don't know that that model would have worked for me. Although over time, once it more and more became the place, Friday morning was the place and time when people would gather at the chapel, expecting that what's going on in our community is going to be dealt with there in that place. And I was always myself. I mean, I was never it wasn't as though, I just need to be 6 different people. No, I'm very much just who I am when I'm performing in that space, but doing it in a way that's as interfaith as it can be. And of course, as you know, in the memoir, I told some stories about what happened with our Holocaust memorial service, about how our Jewish students ended up just finally saying, no, you're not getting it right, and we're just going to need to take it over. And indeed, I was a latecomer to be taught what it is what I needed to let go of in order to make it what it needed to become. And so now it's not this, it's not this thing that's packing in 600 people at a time any longer, because what I was doing for something special was for that occasion was something that was a big draw, but it was not what it needed to be. And I needed our existing Jewish students to just tell me what it needed to be for them.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I don't know if you kind of noticed this, but there's several times in your memoir you talk about music. I mean, everyone from Coleman Hawkins to Billie Holiday to Johann Sebastian Bach and Beethoven, Mahler. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what music means to you, and then what does music teach us about being human?
Yeah. Well, firstly, this starts with my father too, because we lived in Michigan, so he's an assiduous golfer, but that's pretty tough for about 5 months a year. So so every year he was in a musical and in the chorus, and so every year he's bringing home the album for whatever the show is. And oh my goodness, the year that the show was West Side Story, I'll never forget the first time I heard that album. Such fabulous music. I've never heard music like this again. Just the sheer genius that's in it came through to me, and I played it assiduously. Yeah, I had various experiences over the year as you learned in the memoir. From my senior year of high school, I had an evening job working at a jazz show. I was the helper for this jazz musician, so I sort of got a taste of his world. And he did not want a helper, and he especially didn't want some jock, this kid. And oh my goodness, he get all these phone calls. Isn't that the quarterback? And he'd roll his eyes. But it turned out, it stunned him. Of course, I'm a sponge for his stories about all these great jazz musicians that he knew and why he loves this music. So yeah, that just filled me up. The one other, there's a lot I could do here, but I would say one thing with regard to music. I had not known the English cathedral tradition until I became an Anglican, and then it's just, it's soul music to me. Then for years, all the years that I was in Albany, and then in Kalamazoo, teaching there, and then when my wife fought cancer for 10 years. And was at the very end of it for 4 years. So for 4 years, we could have lost her virtually any week. And during that period, when now I think I know what I'm going to lean on from my Anglican favorites, and did to some degree. But now J.S. Bach just enters my life in a way that's just life-saving. And my beloved spouse did come to appreciate what J.S. Bach meant to me, and she respected it. But, she was Lutheran. She grew up on that.
Oh, right. Even the hymns. Exactly.
And the music that fed her was the St. Louis Jesuit music. It's that stuff that just meant the world to her.
And during that time, your brother, died, and then your other brother was in this terrible car accident. Music's helped you in those times of suffering. Like, what else kind of gets you through that? I mean, you've been through some horrible things in your life.
Yeah. Well, I've always prayed the office, but yes, the music that I don't know. I assume at some point I would have discovered that old English cathedral tradition, even if I hadn't become an Anglican, because I love it dearly, and it is my spirituality, and that's just even something to discover about yourself. Kelly Brown Douglas is a dear friend to me, one of my closest friends, and that's something she says about herself too. Because this is something she's gotten her whole life. Why are you in that church? I look at you and who you are, it just doesn't fit. And they want to for years, she's had to deal with people who kind of try to shame her, out of it and so on. And she'll say, I learned something about who I am spiritually, and recognize the fit between myself and this tradition in a way that I need it. And so I just don't have any need to relinquish it. I wouldn't want to.
I'm preaching tomorrow night is the 50th anniversary of our Thursday night evensong, and so I'm preaching about exactly this. So I'm going to tell them all the things that we just talked about, because you're right. I mean, there's something, and they work so hard, the men and boys in our choir. I mean, the boys are practicing every morning for 6 days a week in order to have the highest levels of quality. And I can't express to them how meaningful it is for me and how much I'm fed by that.
Yeah. Well, of course, today I can't even hear those St. Louis Jesuit songs anymore. I can't sing them anymore. I mean, I just start crying because it just takes me right back to, to her and to those years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question. What is theological liberalism, and why do you think that this tradition matters today?
Well, I wrote this big trilogy on it. I had written a number of other theological books before I did this one. In fact, at the outset, it really wasn't. It wasn't as though I had this thought, I'll just need to write this whole trilogy. I'd written a Barth book, and I'd written a book on evangelicalism. Yeah. In fact, that was the period when Brenda I thought was the first phase, that people of that period. I thought she's going to die right now, and that was just the only thing that I could even, just in the wee hours when she's asleep, I would go and write this book that was just the only thing that gave me some kind of psychic distance from this, just watching her being tortured to death. So, I'd written all these other theological books during that period. And what I had discovered about myself during that period is I can't write about politics. I'd written all these books about economic democracy and the like earlier on. And during that period, I could only write about theology during the period that I was losing her. And I just had this kind of programmatic kind of agenda about what I was going to do. And down the road, liberalism, the liberal tradition, was going to be the next one, as it was. And yet I hadn't crawled very far into it. And I realized one day, walking across the campus of Kalamazoo College, I'm kind of mapping out what it's going to end up meaning if I'm this far into the Unitarians and the Universalists, and mapping what this is going to mean. It's like, no, this is not going to be one volume. This is going to be 3 volumes, and they're going to be whoppers. And I just need to sort of give myself to what that would mean. And I had to call my publisher and make sure it was going to be all right. Yes, it did turn into a kind of magnificent obsession. And that's just the U.S. American tradition.
Right, exactly.
3-volume trilogy. That's just starting with, New England Congregationalists in the middle of the 18th century, the New England Arminians, who later, a half century later, they become Unitarians, which they don't want to own. No, don't call us that. It's hurting our feelings that you're calling us Unitarians. But finally, William Ellery Channing gets up in 1819 and says, look, they're going to call us that anyway. We might as well just wear it as a badge of honor. And so now you got a split in the Congregational church. You had 2 wings of it. And meanwhile, you've also got this little Universalist group as well. So you got kind of 3-pronged thing already going on in the early 19th century, just in the U.S. And they're all wonderful little traditions. And that's even before this story's really gotten going again within Congregationalism, with Horace Bushnell and all that. So yeah, I needed 3 huge volumes for that. And I did, I was mindful that, if I'm going to tell a story that's 200 years long and then still ongoing by the time it's done, I needed to find this thing in a way that, that speaks to the whole thing. I can't, and this was immediately important because so much of the literature that existed about liberal theology during that time just defines it as something that's really just describing a moment in its life. It's kind of the late 19th century, early 20th century. It's basically Harnack, and that's the way my beloved friend Jim Cone taught it here at Union too for his entire career. He was happy to just let Harnack represent liberalism, right? And one day he was done with that. He'd put Harnack against Machen, and we're done with liberalism. I teased him relentlessly about this for years. But No, it's not just that Harnack thing at the end of the 19th century. It's liberalism had been around for long more than a century and a half before anyone ever heard of Harnack, and it's still going a century later. So what is this thing that's all that, and not just that progressive German nationalist thing that was going on in the 1890s and early 20th century that Karl Barth, got rid of. I did define. I said, if this is the group that's always always got an argument about how there's such a thing as overbelief, that there's the church has a problem with too much dogmatic overbelief, convincing people that they have to believe things that they just find unbelievable. And that is a problem in our church. And it's especially a problem in dealing with the problem on the other side, because it's the culture of secular disbelief that just believes that Christians are idiots, and they've got this 11-year-old idea of what religion is in their heads that then they just make fun of. So then you get this whole literature of hard deistic secular disbelief that's sometimes quite harsh and ridiculing, but in some ways you gotta say, well, how can you blame them if they're always kind of reacting against basically a fundamentalist way of understanding our own traditions. So these liberals are people who just always have got this kind of this third way idea. We've got to steer between dogmatic overbelief and secular disbelief, and it is possible if then the next move they make is to say, we don't allow any we're not going to say that an external authority has the right, can compel our belief about any particular thing, that just because an external authority says something, that is not a sufficient reason for us to think we have to believe it. Of course, what comes in immediately is the whole problem of even if you've got an infallible text, there's no such thing as an infallible interpretation. And so much of liberalism just runs down that track, because liberal, if it means if it ever just means one thing, it's the freedom principle. It's intellectual freedom and the rights of individual freedom, that whole bundle that sort of come with it. And so liberalism can end up being attached to all manner of theologies and ecclesiologies and politics and so on, and it does, which makes it complicated, and it's why these volumes are so long. But it's always the line that's got these two things of dealing with the external authority issue in a way that opens up your right to your intellectual freedom, for it to make sense. That no, there's not any particular interpretation about anything based on an external authority that you have to believe in this way. No, the liberals, in our tradition, this is latitudinarians already in the early 17th century, right. Yeah. Making this kind of argument, just saying, well, come on, interpretation is various. We got to be free enough to be able to honor the range of interpretations that are right here at Oxford, which is where that group started at grade 2. And of course, there was another wing of it, the whole Jeremy Taylor group as well, saying a similar thing, with a little different theology than that grade 2 circle. So yeah, it always runs that way. It's that kind of an argument. I got more things to say about it, of course, but those are the fundamental things.
John Behrens was the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association and lives in San Francisco. And I always enjoy talking to him about Unitarians and Unitarianism. He writes books about transcendentalists and 19th century theology. He's a lovely person. So go ahead.
I don't know John very well. I've only met him at one conference. A lovely guy. I always feel like I know him very well because I was very close to Forest Church. So Forest was dear to me.
So, one of the things in the book that you talk about is just like how you don't want to just get trapped in talking about Donald Trump all the time. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know. But that was, in the previous administration. This was before we knew that he was going to be president now. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about just the first 100 days of the Trump administration. You can also just say, move on to the next question. That's fine too. But I wonder what do you think we're going to remember about this time, these last 105 days or what have you?
Well, I know what I'm going to remember about it, Malcolm. It's just the intense amount of grief and fear that's out there. I mean, you can just go anywhere. Today, it's just coming at you from every side. And I am out there a fair amount. So I would say that the main difference between the first time and what I've experienced this time is this just feels like it's just pastoral all the time. You almost can't even get to the moment where people will ask me the question about, okay, what should I be doing in life? And honestly, I've ended up contenting myself with double down on what you're already good at. Since it's coming at us from every side, this isn't the time to go discover something new about yourself and try, get some other skill set. My goodness, we need, you to kind of double down on what you're already, what your skills already are. So if it's working for you at all, but that's about as strategic as I get these days, because there's such just intense grieving and hurt and indeed and loss that's occurring that I don't do much else really, but just deal with that, and kind of try to maintain enough spiritual practices just to hold myself in the life, in the work of it,
Yeah, it's interesting. As you're talking, I just almost feel like your whole life has kind of prepared you for this, and you're right. You in particular have certain skills and certain aptitudes that you've honed over decades. And yeah, I can imagine now's the time to kind of rise to that level of being, I don't even know how to describe it, pastor, to the people that you encounter.
There's also the fact that by the time you've written a memoir, if you've written 25 books already, and now one of them's a memoir, you've kind of put it out there what you think the meaning of it all is. So it's not like I'm a slave to the next book anymore. It has somewhat delivered me from feeling like, I've always got to be working on whatever's that next thing.
In the second last page, you use this wonderful expression. You talk about a Christian being, and you describe it as a ruined word. And so my question is, how do we, as followers of Jesus, help to prevent Christian from becoming a ruined word?
Yeah. Well, that's. The frame for that is not just recently, because there I was saying, in fact, that even I'm picking up something I had said in the previous chapter, because for pretty much the whole time that I've been at Union and Columbia, I've been here 20 years now, that's the period in which I recognized that my previous way of operating on the road, which was that I don't need to be self-conscious about being a Christian or a theologian or any of that. I'm speaking somewhere where they've already invited me, so they know about that. So I don't need to be self-conscious about this. And that was my attitude all through the 80s and 90s. And then I felt that moving into what became, we're just past Generation X, that it just felt like no, that doesn't cut it any longer. We're now kind of entering a period in our kind of cultural history where most of the audiences I'm speaking to are kind of so on board. They haven't grown up in anything. These aren't people who've got a story about being hurt by some religious tradition they're in, because they have no memory of having been in one at all, and have quite stereotyped ideas about what religious anything is. And so the only idea of any Christian anything that they have in their heads is indeed, it's the Christian right. It's Pat Robertson and all that. And so I realized that I'm dealing now with something that has changed. And I can't be giving talks that doesn't have some moment in it. Maybe we might get 2/3 of the way through the talk, but I finally just have a kind of self-conscious moment about speaking to this very thing, to saying, I realize that for many of you, Christianity is just a ruined word. That my identity as a Christian is something just so alien to you that it's just hard to fathom. How can you be, the way you are and the like? And I would say, that I was drawn to a life of faith, entering the mystery of the divine by its grace. I remember when it happened to me, and that I am someone for whom this Jesus story just drew me like a magnet into its gravitational force. It has to do with the divine word, entering the world, and it's a challenge to counter every form of exploitation and violence. And it's just so deep in me. I do in fact have no real need to want to give it up. There's just nothing in me that would want to relinquish it. But I do understand how it is that for you, that's just not what the word conveys when you hear it. You don't think that. And it's a failing of the church. It speaks to the issues that speak to all these books I've written, because indeed, almost all of them are about the Christian story is so much greater than it seems. That there's so much in it that's life-giving and wonderful, and much of it sophisticated and profound and spiritual and life-giving. But so much of it is just kind of down the memory hole. And so I didn't write all these books in order to develop some scholarly reputation. I really have. I came into something that's so much better than I would have even guessed growing up. But then that goes to my wife, Brenda. She used to say, people don't know what they're missing. People should join a church, but they just have no idea what it is that what they're missing. And then, she would pick them up, the strays, as she would call them, doing hospital calls, or just, meeting people who don't have, or who left it decades ago and have just totally forgotten what it is that they would have gotten if they just bind with people, because indeed they're lonely as hell. Well, yeah, it's lonely out how, and especially this country will do that to you, because indeed it is telling you your life doesn't really matter, and it doesn't matter. That's what this culture is telling you all the time. And unless you're bound up with people who've living out some other story than that, and care about you, and give you people to care about, you wouldn't know.
And you of almost anyone has helped me understand and be able to articulate that story and that compelling vision. And you're so right. It's just I worry sometimes that the institutional fall apart to such a great extent that we just won't have the people that we need who understand the tradition and are able to articulate what it means for each next generation. But I'm very grateful, for what you're doing, and I'm still working my way through reading all your books, and I'll always cherish this conversation that we had today when I open up the next one.
Thank you, Malcolm. It was a great privilege and delight for me to talk to you.
Yeah, such an amazing thing for me. Please join us next week, or please join us on Sunday in person, when our guest will be Russell Zhang, professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University, and a leading sociologist of race, religion, and social movements. We rely on your support for the forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. There are many ways to give, including texting the word THINK, THINK, to the number 76278. And again, Gary, thanks so much for your work and for this time together today.
Blessings to you. I'm so glad you are where you are.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you.
Welcome. All right.
Take care.
Take care.